The best bets are here, and if you want to cash in on what could be a very interesting week 2, I say it's not a very exciting week 2 around college football, but I don't want to jinx myself. Welcome on in to SEC Live here at the Voice of College Football. I'm your host, as always, Lucas Hill. Follow me on the socials at Lucas Hill SEC. Make sure you follow the Voice of College Football at THEVOCFB. We got Joe Lisi here, betting insider over at Sportsgrid. Joe, good to see you, my friend. How are you today?
Oh, doing well, Lucas. Week 2 of college football, a little bit under the radar per se, but outside the marquee matchup of Oklahoma and Michigan. But week number 1 did not disappoint, especially from the gambling aspect. Dogs were barking across the board, so hopefully we could get some winners in week number 2.
By the way, guys, you can check out Joe over at goforthe2.com. He also has the I Said It podcast that is live, pretty much talking all thing around the sport of football. Also is on Sirius XM channel 159, correct?
Yes, actually, they can find all the work as well on sportsgrid.com. So go to sportsgrid.com. We do college football today, pregame show 10 to 12 every Saturday.
Joe, got a big week ahead in the SEC, at least 4, in my opinion, marquee matchups this weekend. We'll start off number 1 with Ole Miss going to Kroger Field to play Kentucky. Not surprisingly, from what I saw, the line has kind of shifted around from a 10.5-point line to a 9.5-point spread in this one. Obviously, Austin Simmons struggled in his first game, especially with 2 picks on back-to-back drives, but overall dominant win against what could be probably the worst team in the Sun Belt Conference in Georgia State. What do you think that's the cause of the line being so low? And because typically for a game like this, and when you look at the matchup, you think, well, this should be a 14, 15, 16-point spread. What do you think that's the call? What do you think that Vegas is thinking when it comes to a spread being this low? Is it from what happened last year? Is it just from what you saw from week 1 from both of these? What's the cause of that?
Well, I think you take into a couple of factors. So you look at the series history of Ole Miss and Kentucky. Last 4 games, Lucas, have been decided by a total of 2.5 points. And let's not forget with Jackson Dart last year and Ole Miss, they were at home. They were laying 16.5, 17 points to Kentucky and lost the ball game outright. So you take that into account. This team looks a little bit different offensively with Austin Simmons at the helm, even though, they won that matchup as he has, experienced as Jackson Dart, especially going into a road environment in Lexington. And I understand Mark Stoops in Kentucky had a down year last year, but in this particular spot, he doesn't just have to win the game by 2 or 3 points. He actually has to win it by 2 scores, and I think that's where you're seeing some fluctuation in the market from 10.5 down to 9.5. I think the public perception is Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss is more complete than Kentucky right now, and that quarterback Zach Calzada that transferred in from Texas A&M and obviously FCS. But at the end of the day, Kentucky with Mark Stoops, I still think would be live as a 9.5-point underdog. I'm going to be taking them with the points come Saturday.
Do you expect the line to kind of move down as we get closer to Saturday, or is it going to stay around that 9.5, 10.5?
It wouldn't shock me now. I mean, we've seen some smart money come in from whenever you get obviously 10.5 and based off the performance at the early start and last week, people jumped the gun with Kentucky. I think we might settle back in at 10, but I still think it's a difficult game. I really think that when you look at Ole Miss as well, it's not just offensively, right? So they lose Bentley, they lose Trey Harris from the offensive side of the ball, and then obviously Jackson Dart, but they also lost Walter Nolan. Is that defense going to be as sound as they were last year, only giving up 82 rushing yards per game and had the best rushing defense in all of the SEC? If that happens in this game, then yeah, I think you'll see in future performances, Ole Miss might be, more heavy favorites in particular games, and maybe the line will go in their favor. But in this particular matchup, after a lackluster performance by Austin Simmons, you're seeing bettors jump on Kentucky, especially as a home dog.
I can see why you say that, especially when you talk about the 82 yards per game that you gave up defensively, which was impressive. Kentucky came in last week, even though it was against a MAC program in Toledo, which, by the way, no disrespect to Toledo. Jason Candle has some great things going on up there. They're one of the better G6s in college football, had over 220 yards combined between Dante Dowdle and Seth McGowan, both of which I expect to play a big role in this one. It could be ended up being a time of possession game. That in turn as well, I think, does play a role into the line being such to the point where we could potentially see by Saturday maybe a one possession line.
Yeah, it's possible. I mean, it wouldn't shock me in any capacity. And again, when you watch that Toledo game and you watch Kentucky and just that matchup, you mentioned Toledo being one of the better teams in the MAC, being favored to potentially win from the odds perspective a MAC championship, and seeing that performance. And again, Kentucky from an offensive perspective has basically been challenged over the past couple of seasons. When they run the football effectively, they play ball control and play sound defense, then they're in matchups and potentially cover lines, right? But think about just this matchup from the football perspective. If Ole Miss and Austin Simmons hit on all cylinders early and they got the, let's say, ring rust out of their system last week in that second half, if they start fast, they're going to put the pressure on Kentucky to potentially match them score for score, right? And that's where the game can potentially go off the rails. So a lower scoring game, I think, favors Kentucky. I think when you look at Ole Miss in this matchup, if they start jumping up 14-0, and from an in-game perspective, and you'll see this line fluctuate throughout, depending upon, I know you're in Connecticut, but, throughout the nation, depending if you have in-game wagering, you'll see this line potentially go to maybe 10, 13, 14 points. And the inclination is, well, you'll jump on Kentucky. Well, from that type of perspective, that's where I would bet the other side and bet Ole Miss to potentially blow them out.
I'm in Louisiana, Joe, but it's close enough.
Oh, I thought you were. Oh, yeah, there you go. I thought you were in Connecticut. That's all right. I thought, what part of Louisiana? My daughter goes to Baton Rouge.
Baton Rouge, yes.
All right, so my daughter's a freshman at the university.
Okay, awesome.
So there you go. Big Tiger fan here.
Yeah, I'm about an hour away from there, which is
okay.
We got to play them anyway in about a week.
Right.
So I don't expect there to be a line for that one. But
yeah,
going towards the border war, since we're talking about different states, first time they're playing in 10 plus years at the most. Line right now is 6.5. Over under is about 51.5. I have Kansas potentially covering. I expect this one to hit the under. I do expect this to be a line of scrimmage game. Kansas's defense has been flying around the field. I really think that this is probably the best defense that Lance Leipold has had in his few years that he's been at Kansas. Missouri with a young quarterback, they have some offensive line questions. I know they struggled through the first 15, 20 minutes of the game against Central Arkansas, which could cause some concern, but they can't just be they have to play a complete game, in my opinion, if you're able to win this football game, if you're Missouri. Where do you see this line potentially hitting at the end of the day? Because it's a 6.5-point favorite going towards Missouri.
Yeah, so it's interesting, right? Because, you just think it's SEC and Big 12. So the 6.5, just with Drinkwitz and Missouri, even now with Bo Prabula as the starting quarterback, you say, okay, we'll give the edge to the SEC team. But, Missouri comes out, they win their first game. But Kansas, 2-0 now. And this is not the Kansas, to your point, that struggled last year, that had Jalen Daniels injured for the early part of the year, and then Bean came in, and that offense was a little ineffective, and then they found their groove at the end of October into November, where they went on that late season run before they lost to Baylor and didn't become bowl eligible, right? So you're right about that. I would be inclined to take Lance Leipold and Jalen Daniels in the spot. They're running the football effectively. I do agree with you that front seven has played much better. You saw what they were able to do in their first round game or week one game against Fresno State, shutting down E.J. Warner and that offensive attack. And I understand Fresno State's a little bit light this year with Mikey Keene transferring out, but still, that's still a dominant defensive effort that they put, and they followed it up last week. So again, you talk about having 2 games under your belt. You talk about a quarterback that's mobile, could take a game over. Maybe they don't win it, but I still would be inclined to take the points with Kansas. I do like them to potentially strike the upset. I'm not sold on this Missouri team this year with Pabula, and obviously it's certainly not in my opinion the same team that we saw last year with Burden, Theo Weiss, and Brady Cook. So give me the points with Kansas. I think they make it a game.
I think if we're doing player props on this one, I would have Bangley Kamara at least over a half a sack in this one. He's been all over the field. He's definitely making a name for himself in the Big 12. I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up being an all-conference player when it's all said and done. He's been making a big difference in the middle of the field at the linebacker position. So I do think he'll play a role whenever it comes to that line kind of moving in between, probably hitting the under at this point in time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you talk about a playmaker that could get quarterback pressures, and you're talking about a front seven that has been very active, and we talk about both of these teams are physical, right? Which team do you buy more into? Do you buy more into Kansas or do you buy more into Missouri? Watching Missouri last week again, now knowing that they have quarterback issues, that could put more pressure on their defense. And when I say quarterback issues, Bo Perbula will be the guy most likely for a majority of this game, right? So again, when I look at this game and I say which front seven am I more impressed with, for me it is Kansas. So I would only bet. Now, the way I bet and the way I break it down is if I like a particular side, and like I said, I like Kansas, I'm not looking at any other sides on the Missouri. I'm only dialed Kansas, and then I'll make an assessment from an in-game perspective, right? And that's the way I'll break it down. I believe Kansas is the better team. I think they are going to cover this line, and I'm only looking offensively and defensively at player props for the Jayhawks in this matchup. Now, if the first quarter and second quarter comes out and Kansas trails and Missouri shows me something that I didn't expect, I'll readjust and then obviously bet those props from an in-game perspective.
Moving on to South Florida and Florida, little in-state rivalry. USF dominant against what was the early favorite to take that G6 spot in the college football playoff in Boise State. But in my opinion, I mean, everybody raves about South Florida and what Alex Golesh is doing. And I'm not taking away anything from what USF has done. I think they're on their way to potentially being a spoiler in the American Conference. But I don't think today, going up against a loaded program in Florida that is finally healthy, that should be able to, in Ben Hill Griffin, to cover this one pretty easily. It's a 17.5-point line. Over-unders 56.5. Don't be surprised if Florida manages to put some points up on the board against a program like USF and try to make a statement early on before you go out to Baton Rouge. But don't be surprised if this one hits the cover spread for Florida in this one.
It's interesting. So, okay, I agree with everything you said. But when you look at this game, you brought up and you bring up the September 13th matchup against LSU. So is there potential for both LSU and Florida to have what we call look-ahead spots? Now, you know, if we're looking at La Tech for LSU as opposed to USF, which one is going to be more of an underdog, right? You look at Byron Brown, you look at what they did to Boise State, and I agree with you. I wasn't high on Boise State being the same team that they were last year with Ashton Genty, right? They struggled. They only had 100 yards on the ground, less than 4 yards per carry. And Byron Brown was really the difference maker. 43 rushing yards, a touchdown. He throws it for over basically 160 yards in that performance and led USF to the outright dominating 34-7 win. So, but the spread is interesting because it's 17.5, and now we're seeing 16.5, I believe, here in Jersey, and every state is a little bit different. Yeah. I'll just give you the updated line here in New Jersey. We were seeing 16.5 at the start of the day. It might be back up, but it's a situation where I would be inclined to take the points as well. Now, I'm not going to be betting this game. I do like the Ole Miss game a little bit better. I do like the Kansas game a little bit better. I'm not going to be betting this game. Potentially pre-kick from an in-game, I might. But I would probably take the points with South Florida because, a lot of these kids in state go to high school together, the competitive factor, the potential look ahead with Florida. And I love DJ Lagway, but I would take a shot with Golish. And he's shown a propensity to cover these big lines and basically go toe to toe with some of the big boys. He did it with Alabama for a half. They were competitive. Yeah. There's the potential for them to be competitive in this game. As long as Byron Brown is healthy, I would take the points 16.5, 17 with USF.
Joe, you brought up an interesting point about each state's line. So does each state have a specific line for each game, or does it all go down to Vegas?
No, it doesn't. And we always talk about each state, but they're not going to be dramatically different, right? So you're not going to get 16.5 in say New Jersey, and then all of a sudden in Louisiana, or let's just say in Florida, you're going to get 20s. It just doesn't happen.
It's always going to range around that half or a point difference.
Correct. So and so and there should be, and I brought this up, there should be a universal line how we basically mark all these wins and losses, because again, I'm in New Jersey. Let's say I lay 16.5. You're in Louisiana. You get 17.5. If the game falls on 17, let's just say, if you laid it with Florida and Louisiana, you're a loser, right? But if you bet it in Jersey, you're a winner. Right. So how do we differentiate, right, whether a team is an ATS record if there's no universal line potentially that everybody could use to mark wins and losses? So it does skew numbers to a certain capacity. And that's something that I've argued that needs to be done, because when you hear a team is 30-3 against the number, well, how do we know for a fact that's obviously true depending upon how they market? Now, they used to do it strictly all to Vegas, but that should change with knowing that Jersey has bigger handles than Vegas in potential markets. So, you really have to depend on where all the money's going. But that's a conversation for a different day, right?
Right. If you are a first-time gambler, which I'm sure most of our viewers are probably going to end up being, if you are a first-timer, are you betting the points or are you going to bet the spread?
I mean, again, bet, the money line or the points. So, like, again, and obviously do your due diligence. Obviously, if you're under a certain age, don't gamble. You can't do that. Obviously, it's illegal, and it's got to be a certain age with a lot of these books, and I don't condone
it. So basically, everybody under 21, click off.
Yeah, there you go. But when you do it with there is certain types of wagering that you do, and the more advanced you are, player props and obviously game sides and totals are what a majority of people play. Certain states don't have player props depending upon the state based off the location and locality. New York doesn't have it. New Jersey does. Certain states have player props for colleges, others don't. So that's all important when you do your due diligence, right?
Right. Arizona State and Mississippi State. I find this one really, really interesting. 59.5 point over under, 6.5 point spread for Arizona State. I'm inclined that this could eventually be a pretty easy win for bettors, because if I'm them, I'm taking the under, because I'm not really sold on Mississippi State's offense just yet. I think this could eventually be a ground and pound game. I know we saw a lot of Devon Booth and Fluff Bothwell in the second half against Southern Miss, knowing how Mississippi State has been. And this isn't just with what happened last week. You saw what happened last year. A lot of times I saw Mississippi State really, and defensively, not really play a complete game. And I can see why it's at that level, because defensively, Mississippi State, one of the worst in the SEC, with an Arizona State program that returns one of the best receiver quarterback duos in Sam Levitt and Jordan Tyson. So where do you see this game potentially heading? And is 59.5 too much or not enough at all?
Well, remember this game last year. Arizona State flew out to a huge first half lead in Tempe, right?
Right.
I believe they had a 30-0 first half lead. And if I'm
Yes.
not mistaken, this total was right in the area of about 58.5, 59.5 last year in Arizona. And they did not get there. I was up late. I remember that game. But I believe in Arizona State. I do not believe in Blake Shapen. And it's nothing against Shapen. It's just this offensive mentality. I just don't think they're up to par in terms of the offensive line, the defensive line. I think Arizona State, from a defensive perspective, is very underrated, especially against the run. And that, even though Shapen put up numbers, this offense of Mississippi State is still predicated on offensive balance and running the football. And that's where I give the edge to Arizona State. I still think Sam Levitt and that offense can throw on that secondary, and I still think they can run on them. I would lean to Arizona State. I like them a lot in this game, but I do think this game is a little bit different than last year. I think we fly through the total.
I think this one ends up being closer than it was last year compared to what it was at the end. I don't think Arizona State does fly to that big lead that they had early on. I do think this is competitive throughout this game. I think Mississippi State stays within that 2-possession range. But at the end of the day, I do think Arizona State does cover by double digits, and I think it ends up being a nice little win for the better.
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't shock me. Again, Blake Shapen's an experienced quarterback, right? He led his team to played in the Big 12 championship game against Oklahoma State, transferred out from Baylor, and here he is now in Mississippi State. Got injured last year, inconsistent. Now he's got a lease on life, and this offense seems to understand the offensive philosophy of Jeff Lebby, but still, it's just it comes down to, I believe in Arizona State. I just believe that Dillingham is a very good coach. He has his teams prepared. And again, I understand Scadaboo, and they lost some playmakers offensively, but they're getting back still 7 starters. And that defense, from a front 7 perspective, was one of the best in the nation. They went toe-to-toe with Texas. Again, we'll see how this game plays out. Styles make fights, Lucas.
Right.
And that's why I think this one is intriguing. But I would lean to Arizona State to cover this line, but we'll see.
Michigan at Oklahoma. Sharon Moore takes a visit back to his old alumnus, his old coach that he had to play for. Line right now, Oklahoma at 4.5. Over/under is 45.5. In my opinion, this one hits it. This one probably hits the over. I really do believe that Bryce Underwood could have himself a nice day. I do think that he will struggle at times because this Oklahoma front 4 could be one of the best that we see around the SEC. And it all starts with our Mason Thomas, who's one of the top edge presences in college football. I think he's going to have himself a field day, especially for one going up against a pretty physical Michigan offensive line. I think John Mateer, in my opinion, if this is a player prop, if he has 300-plus total yards in this one, I would bet the over on that one. Bryce over 200 yards passing is a pretty easy one for me. Where do you see this game ended up going?
It's interesting because it opened at 2.5 and they bet it up to 5.5. And, you think about the line itself, right? Now,
Right.
Mateer is you can make the argument, a significant upgrade from last year, Michael Hawkins and Jackson Arnold, and the quarterbacks that they had, very inexperienced. He's a dual threat. He threw for 4 touchdowns and I believe 300-plus yards in their week 1 dominating home win. And you have a defensive team in Michigan. Now, are they going to open it up with Bryce Underwood, his second career start on the road against a veteran defensive coordinator and a veteran coach in Brett Venables? That's the style and game plan that we have. This line, seeing the line and just knowing that Venables was able to contain Jalen Milroe last year and see how they shut down Alabama, I would be inclined to lay it with John Mateer in Oklahoma. I'd rather have the more experienced quarterback. I'd rather have the veteran coach and the D coordinator playing at home. as opposed to an offense that still really isn't the offensive identity of Michigan, right? Michigan relies on the run for years and works off of play action. And as athletic as Bryce Underwood is, it's still going to be a large hill to climb on the road in Norman. I would lay it, total wise, I would probably be with you and say it would blow through this total, because I think in order for Michigan to win, they need chunk plays.
Yes.
And if Bryce can do that, then this should lead to the total. So I'm with you, but I would take the other side in Oklahoma in this matchup.
I agree in that part as well. I do think that this ends up being a field goal game. I think Michigan kind of finds a way to cover it. I think, like you mentioned already, you don't want to put the pressure all on Bryce. I think Justice Haynes is going to get his touches. But what was so unique about both of their games last week, they didn't show their cards offensively. And I think that's what you're going to expect this year. You're going to see the playbook open up a little bit more, not to the fullest extent with Bryce, but I do think with Mateer, with an experienced play caller and a guy that's been with him for the last 3 years, I do think that this is an opportunity for John Mateer to really start utilizing what has been a pretty good spread out offense that Ben Arbuckle has had.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, whenever you have the offensive coordinator and Ben Arbuckle will transfer him with Mateer, that's what, Brett Venables had to do to basically give them, total autonomy to allow John Mateer to elevate this program. Let's not forget the expectation with Oklahoma. The win total was only 6.5 this year. They get this victory over Michigan, Lucas. They're going to dominate potentially and be a challenger for, an SEC championship, even though it's an out-of-conference game. The over-expectation, right? You overseed, you come out, you're 2-0. That's huge for them. So we'll see. I'm with you. I think it's huge, and I think that potentially we blow through this total. And I think there is the potential for both quarterbacks to eat in this game. I just lean more towards Mateer being the more experienced guy. But if Bryce Underwood could surprise, they have a shot to cover this line.
If you bet over 6.5 for Oklahoma, you pretty much won yourself some pretty easy money in that one. I thought that was a gracious line for what Oklahoma has. Yes, I know it was a tough schedule, but knowing the pieces that you got, I've even heard some people like Phil Steele of the college football preview that said, hey, this is a team that is my surprise pick, could end up being a college football playoff contender at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Vanderbilt, Virginia Tech, Vandy going on the road to Blacksburg. VT struggled offensively last week, didn't get an offensive touchdown. So this is an interesting one to me. The line is 1.5 going towards Virginia Tech. Over-under is 47.5. I would take the under in this one, in my opinion. I think Vandy is going to find a way to make chunk plays. I think they're going to play somewhat to what they did with VT last year. Play time of possession, play the option game. But I think they're going to open it up a little bit more with Diego Pavia and let him rip the football down the field, knowing what VT's secondary performed last week against South Carolina.
See, I like Virginia Tech, and I'm high on Virginia Tech this year. I actually picked them over their 6.5 win total. You saw them struggle a little bit in the second half with Lenora Sellers. I do believe in drones. They didn't utilize them a lot in the first half in the RPO game. No. I think they'll utilize them in this game against Vanderbilt. The fact that Virginia Tech is at home, I think, is a huge factor, and why I would lay the 1.5. The fact that it's basically right there, almost a pick 'em. I like Brent Pry. I like Virginia Tech. And it's not to take away from Diego Pavia or Clark Lee. I think they've done a fantastic job. They were a gutty team against the number last year, went toe-to-toe with some of the big boys, beat Alabama, covered against Texas at home. It's just that on the road in this matchup, I think it's a bad spot for them. I believe it drones, and from a mismatch perspective, I think Virginia Tech could cover this line. Again, a tough game. It's a very tough game, but I would lay it 1.5 with Virginia Tech in this matchup.
And I think on the road, their last 3 games that they played, the last one they covered LSU, covered against Missouri. Yep. I think they lost the cover against Georgia State. But regardless, it's a big matchup going on the road. going into Blacksburg, it's a whole different environment. I think this might be the second toughest environment they played, with LSU obviously being up front. But I think overall, I want to see what Vanderbilt does in their secondary. They lost a lot on the defensive side of the ball. Let's see how consistent they can be from year one of a brand new era of coaching going into year two, and see if they can't bring the same consistency.
Yeah, absolutely. And think about this, Virginia Tech, again, just from a schematic standpoint, challenged South Carolina for a half. I mean, I was very impressed. It wasn't until they fell behind, the kid, returns the punt, that basically Virginia Tech struggled. But from that point, it was a 10-8 game. It was a lower scoring game. They contained Lenora Sellers. They forced South Carolina to methodically work down the field and basically settle for a field goal and everything else. And that's what you wanted to see. So if we're talking about just athleticism, Virginia Tech showed me that they can go toe-to-toe with some of the big boys. And like South Carolina, they can play with Vanderbilt. It's not going to be easy, but again, playing at home, I think they can weather the storm. And that's where you say, okay, can this game go into the fourth quarter, even if it's close? Let's not forget, this game went to overtime last year, yes. Right? And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Drones got hurt in that game and wasn't even out there for the final possession. They had a backup in. I could be wrong, but that's what happened, and that's how they were able to pull it out. But again, not going to be easy. Went down to the wire. I think Virginia Tech remembers that, and they cover this line against the Commodores on Saturday.
Joe, last one for you before we let you go.
Sure.
What's your best bet of the entire weekend of week two? Doesn't have to be SEC. It could be anything around.
Wow. I'm still breaking down games now on Wednesday, but I mean, as of right now, I still like Kentucky with the points, and maybe I'm wrong, but I like Kentucky plus the 9.5. I just think from a series perspective, these games always go down to the wire. I believe in Stoops to at least contain Austin Simmons. It's a 10-point number. I'll take the Wildcats right here. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong, but give me the Wildcats plus the points.
What do you think of ULM plus 36.5 going to Alabama?
Tough. That's a tough one. Yeah, that's a tough one. It's a tough environment. I don't know what we're going to get out of Ty Simpson and Kalen DeBoer right now. The problem is they're shell-shocked, right? Yes. And again, they have to make a statement. Ty Simpson didn't play bad, 254 yards, 2 touchdowns, but he's not Jalen Milroe. Jalen Milroe rushed for 20 touchdowns last year solely on the ground. He took games over against Georgia and LSU. Ty Simpson couldn't take that game over with his legs against Florida State. That was the difference. I'll give you one more best bet. I like Baylor plus the points over SMU. I think Baylor's going to be live with Sawyer Robertson. They're catching 3.5 points. So those are my two best bets right now. I obviously have more as the week progresses, but early on, I like Kentucky plus the points, and I like Baylor.
You always need to take gambling advice from somebody, especially when their profile picture is this. Like, I don't know about any of you. Where did you get the chain from, Joe? I need that.
That was at the Super Bowl a couple of years ago. Trey the Truth, rapper based out of Atlanta with Dan Rue. We interviewed them, and it's just great stuff. He allowed me to put on the ice, and there's nothing better than that. So interviews up online. Those were two great guys. We saw them at the Super Bowl out in Las Vegas, and just great stuff a couple of years ago.
That's how you know you're from Jersey, is when you have that fit on. Joe Lisi over at Sportsgrid TV, America's #1 sports betting network, providing free bets 24/7. Also the host of the I Said It podcast. He broadcasts just about almost every weekday. Joe, again, thank you for hopping on with us, brother. We appreciate your time. Where can we find you on the socials, brother?
At Go for the 2, the number 2. Hit me up there. I also do a podcast with former Auburn head coach Terry Bowden. We're on bi-weekly. You can check us out.
Joe Lisi, once again, hopping on with us at SEC Live at the Voice of College Football. Make sure you guys do us a favor, like, share, subscribe, turn on that bell notification so that you are notified every time we post a new video here on SEC Live at the Voice of College Football. Follow me on the socials at Lucas Hill SEC. Follow the Voice of College Football at THEVOCFB. And until next time, ladies and gentlemen, y'all have a great rest of the week. And as always, we will see you all very soon.